Greetings, everyone. I'm the delicious and mythical GriffinMuffin. During lockdown this year, I decided to revisit one of my favorite games, Pillars of Eternity. It made me think about what made this revival of the CRPG genre so great. You see, Pillars of Eternity was in fact a beloved callback to an earlier style of RPG, one that emphasizes choice-driven narrative, tactical combat from a top-down perspective, beautiful 2D environments, and an interesting world to traverse. The main achievements of early RPGs like Fallout 1 and 2, the Baldur's Gate series, Planescape Torment, and Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura is the writing, be that great characters, the world, memorable events, and what the game's story was trying to communicate. When I began writing this script, I came at it from the angle of how Pillars of Eternity is about faith. I saw the clash between the science of animancy, the blind zealotry of the antagonists, and how the control of the gods is the real purpose of the narrative. But the more I thought on it, the more I began to see that this story is not about faith, religion, piety, or souls. It's about truth. Now, I'm referring to truth in a few definitions here. The act of concealing of the truth in order to control one's perceptions. Truth as a concept of a universal framework of understanding the world of Eora in this case. And truth in a more epistemological definition, asking what real knowledge is. How do the people of Eora accept what they perceive as universal truth? I know this sounds weird. After all, how does a video game really convey such a broad and lofty theme? The thing is, it does this subtly. Subtlety, done repeatedly, is, in my opinion, good writing. The game conveys its narrative through very conventional means, but there are many RPG aspects that make it enjoyable and allow the player to delve into this immersive world, be that with immersive quest design, excellently constructed characters, and in-depth world building with the pantheon of this world. So I've decided to break down a game that I personally feel has redefined my own standards for RPGs. I think that breaking down great RPGs like Pillars of Eternity can allow developers to focus on these components when making the next generation of role-playing games. And also, I'm just obsessed with how video games tell stories. Telling stories to me is a way for each and every one of us to communicate to others what we've learned as individuals, to convey what we see as truth in this world. Now, let's all sit down, relax, grab yourself some Rawatai cookies and brew a bit of Merc Brew tea, and get settled in, because we're about to go to a world where gods have been shattered, where the wheel turns to create cosmic balance, and where you, the player, have been given the powerful burden of becoming a watcher. This is the complete narrative breakdown of Pillars of Eternity. The Watcher's journey begins. The introduction for an RPG is a crucial moment, both in teaching the player the gameplay mechanics, but also to ease the player into the setting. However, player choice and the agency of the player must be established in the introduction decisively. In RPGs, you need to create a hook for the player, say by throwing them into a precarious situation like in Baldur's Gate 2. In Baldur's Gate 2, the player wakes up in a holding cell being experimented on by the main villain, Irenicus. The beginning scene of a story is not only important in creating the hook, but also to front-load the audience with the tone of the story. In Baldur's Gate 2, we're given the tone right from the start.
The child of Baal has awoken. It is time for more experiments. The pain will only be passing. You should survive the process. Interesting. You have much untapped power. Do you even realize your potential?
We immediately get the grim dark tone of the story, the atmosphere is established in a distinct visual and audio style, and we see our player character as a test subject, where we are helpless until we are freed by Imoen. There is enough information conveyed to intrigue the player. Another example is Divinity Original Sin 2, when you're arrested and carted off to a prison colony. This is where the companions are introduced to you that will accompany you throughout your journey, but also serves as a way to establish tension, the desire to break free and continue their path to godhood. Both of these examples have the prisoner origin trope. While it is a trope, it is still a useful tool that writers can use for a variety of reasons. Pillars, though, has us travelling somewhere before said precarious situation happens. I think this is because of the sheer scale of the information the writers need to give to the player before they move into the bulk of the story. In fantasy and sci-fi writing, you always want to avoid the info dump. But funnily enough, sometimes players are given subtle info dumps without really realizing it. That's what makes it good writing. Whenever there is a low point in the action of the narrative, such as when the characters are resting or when they're traveling somewhere, like in the intro, the player can be more receptive to what the writer needs you to know. The player is introduced to a few key elements of the world within the first 30 minutes of gameplay. The Adra, the Ingwithans, Animancy, and the Glanfathans, and the many attitudes people have towards all of these things. The cosmology, pantheon, countries, and history of Eora is indeed vast. Like any built-up world, the writers need to be able to focus on what elements of the world they need to convey immediately and what they can glean out later on. The Adra, the Ingwithans, Animancy, and Glanfathans are core elements of the world of Eora, and therefore must be explained to the player as soon as possible. This provides the player with story threads they'll see throughout the game. Shortly after, an ancient Ingwithan machine is activated in your presence by the antagonist of the story, Theos Ix Arcanon. This tears out your soul, making you become a Watcher, and also awakens your soul. A Watcher is someone granted the ability to see and interact with souls, and an awakening is when your soul becomes aware of the previous lives you've lived. In one of your past lives, it seems, you actually knew Theos. Theos talked to you like you were kin, and you followed him in some divine mission. This fills you with curiosity and leaves you feeling restless. From here, we have a two-part combination of the inciting incident and the opening hook. Hooks induce intrigue for the story, while the inciting incident is an event that usually kickstarts the story. It can be right off the bat or have some build-up. In this case, the activation of the Ingwithan machine is the inciting incident, and the reliving of the memory with Theos is the hook, after some build-up. After travelling from this incident to Gilded Vale, the writing then leans towards establishing more of the setting of the world we're in. And nothing communicates that more than a giant tree littered with hanging corpses in the middle of town. Hanging bodies on a tree sends a powerful message to your enemies, and is convenient because you don't need to build a pesky scaffold or anything. It seems that the hanging of corpses on trees just seems to be a go-to for when writers need to build a grim dark world. It is a grim reminder of how the cruelty of human civilization extends to even what we consider untouchable, nature. It does the same in a world deep in existential turmoil like in Disco Elysium. This imagery produces a clash in two symbols in our mind: death and life. Actually, throughout Pillars of Eternity, there are many references to this cycle of life and death. In a recent blog post by Josh Sawyer, one of the main creative leads on Pillars of Eternity and its sequel, Deadfire, someone asked the question associated with Berith, the god of death. In Pillars of Eternity, was the sound of distant bells when the Watcher reads souls chosen for any specific reason, or just a cool sound? Josh Sawyer then responded, "We associate bells with Berith in both Pillars of Eternity and Deadfire. They are the god of death, but also doorways, so we use a bell or chime to suggest bridging the gap between life and death." While this may seem grim, to me it builds up this feeling of how we're in a world where life and death are inextricably linked. It's not all doom and gloom. It is rich with lore and wonder. Eora, the world of war and woe. When we start discussing the world building, we have to separate two core aspects of the world: its pantheon and its history. While the two are not mutually exclusive, the religious ideologies and beliefs of certain factions do have a direct impact on historical events, namely the event known as the Saints' War. For those who haven't played the game, let's keep it short and simple. Aethys, the god of light, hope, and renewal, possessed a farmer named Widewin in the theocratic nation of Rayad Ceres. From there, he led a crusade across the Deerwood and was destroyed by a resistance army and a group of priests of the goddess of war and fire, Margarin, who built a massive bomb called the God Hammer that blew the god and his vessel to smithereens. Throughout gameplay, you can further break down this exposure to Eora's history at two levels: The Saints' War is something that is relevant to the actions of NPCs and companions in the story you're playing. One of your companions, Adair, asks for help to discover the truth of what side his brother fought on during that war. The Saints' War, that is. The Saints' War has a current manifestation or presence in the world that you're playing in. However, we have several key events in Eora's history that precede it. While they're not overtly shown, in some cases you can see how these events have had their impact on the world, a line of dominoes to the current time. These events are shown less, but are accessible to the player by finding books. For you to understand the immensity of the written history of Eora, I'd like to take some time and read out the titles from a series of books. The Deerwood, Part 1, Early Colonial History. The Deerwood, Part 2, The Broken Stone War. The Deerwood, Part 3, The War of the Black Trees and the Rise of Admeth Hadrit. The Deerwood, Part 4, Hadrit's Rebellion. The Deerwood, Part 5, The Proliferation of Animancy, and finally, The Deerwood, Part 6, The Saints' War and Widewind's Legacy. You, the player, are currently living in the moment of history in the Deerwood that was mentioned last, known as Widewind's Legacy. And yeah, it's a bit doom and gloom. Widewind's Legacy refers to an epidemic of children being born without souls, called Hollowborn, specifically in the Deerwood. Widewind's Legacy is established in the game within the first hour of gameplay and is done in a clever way. Instead of explaining what it necessarily is, there is an interaction amongst NPCs that reveals it. A very show-don't-tell scenario.
Of course, we'll need to make some inquiries first. The inestimable Lord Radric VII has taken great pains to insulate our town from Widewind's legacy. Have you ever conceived a Hollowborn child? An infant born without a soul, of course. Lord Radric has made it his first priority to eliminate this scourge from our village. His lordship's wife is with child and due any day now. Without his approval, I shan't be able to find you a permanent settlement. It will have to wait until after the birth. We can continue our interview then, after the bell tolls from Radric's hold to signal my lord's new heir.
Listen!
2 tolls. Let that be the last.
3. Gods have mercy.
It seems your arrival is ill-timed. 3 bells toll only for the death of a Radric. I fear Lord Radric's heir is lost, or else Hollowborn, and so lost all the same.
Widewind's Legacy has similar effects as to what a plague generally does to a population of people. This unseen enemy causes people to start blaming other groups for its emergence, be that worshippers of Aethys or Margren, but more often they blame animancers. Animancers being the scientific elite that focuses on the study of manipulating and repairing souls. Animancers believe that Widewind's Legacy can be fixed with their science. Some people think it is a curse from the gods because they destroyed Aethys during the Saints' War, or they even go far enough to say that it was animancers themselves that caused the legacy through their ungodly practices. Needless to say, these sentiments reflect the attitudes people can develop through history to any sort of issue. The disdain for ways of discovering a new truth in the world, or even fundamentally challenge the established truth. That is why the histories of Eora is one of my favorite aspects of the game's story, because the clashes of ideology across our real world history mostly boils down to either materialistic conditions or the ebb and flow of accepted truths in the world. And this is one thing that I have a gripe with in most fantasy or sci-fi history writing. It's the disconnect to the rhythms of real history. Now, we could talk about how the history of a fantasy world such as Eora is consequentially meaningless, that it doesn't impact the player significantly. I'd argue that that's not the case at all. More importantly, we see this in the pantheon of gods in Eora. The Pantheon of Eora. In the podcast Skeleton Songs, hosted by Lottie Bevan and Alexis Kennedy, who were creative leads on the BAFTA award-winning Cultist Simulator, there's an episode that discusses what world building has become today. They discuss the idea that J.R.R. Tolkien's way of world building was nowhere near as tedious and deliberately laborious as it has become today. In the case of Tolkien, it is said that all he really wanted to do was to build some cool conlangs and make a great story in the world those languages existed in. In an attempt to resynthesize what Tolkien did, all kinds of writers have made world building a bit of a rabbit hole. World building now has books and guides, some of which are honestly misleading and makes the process more laborious, and some that actually really give some good anchors to follow. There is no set-in-stone blueprint of how you should build your world, but there is always a series of considerations and anchors. In the case of Tolkien, at least from my perspective, it was the conlangs he created. In the case of Pillars of Eternity, it is the construction of their pantheon. One problem that I usually have with a lot of religious world building in fantasy worlds is the lack of societal roots that real-world gods tend to take hold in. In many universes, the gods are simply chosen architects, demiurges, or creators of a certain physical or elemental or even material component of the world. The god of oceans, the god of fire, the god of nature, and so on and so on and so forth, with no nuance. I personally think this way of creating a pantheon in a world is sort of shallow and doesn't create an authentic setting. In many real-world polytheistic pantheons, the gods are enrooted in everyday life, but also major aspects of culture and the psyche of the people, which is where I think Pillars of Eternity really strides in its world building. In fact, one of the lead narrative designers, Eric Fenstermaker, commented in an interview about this. Part of the genesis of the Pillars story in particular was the observation that in most fantasy settings, the gods are taken for granted. You know, they're up there on Olympus or in the heavens or wherever, and you have some idea of how your afterlife is going to look, and what steps you have to take to improve your standing in that regard. Characters in these worlds on some level aren't quite human if they don't have to wonder about these things. He goes on to say, "It's a romantic and appealing fantasy to have all that figured out, and to only need to worry about killing your enemies, pleasing your gods, and boning other, similarly carefree and attractive, violet-eyed adventurers." And that's resulted in the prevalence of that kind of setting within the genre. But if you go that route, you miss out on one of the best ways to test your characters, and you also miss on a powerful source of relatability that just about every genre has access to. Religion in any society has profound impacts on its people. It can shape our lives and build our culture. Religion is a means for people to navigate the world and understand the events in their lives with a framework that allows them to reveal the truth. To me, this is expressed in Eora's gods. One of the most interesting gods is Skane, the god of secret hatred, resentment, and violent rebellion. What I find most interesting is that Skane seems to be the theistic embodiment of the oppressed in feudal society. Followers of Skane are those who believe the powerful need to be kept in check, to remind their masters that their power is fickle and can be taken away from them at any time.
I don't expect you to understand what I'm doing. You carry your privilege on your straight shoulders and in your soft hands. Neither the rituals of Scan nor the labors of animancy meet with much approval in polite society. But unsightliness reminds polite society that there are limits. When no one pays attention to the excesses and debaucheries of a lord, you give them something they can't look away from.
Which I can totally get behind if I can be honest with you. It appeals to an enrooted aspect of their society, and from there a religion formed that embodied, essentially, anarchism. There is even the notion that if you are a worshipper of Skane and you become a member of the ruling class, from say usurpation or an uprising, you are abandoned by Skane as you are no longer seen worthy of Skane's power. But where we see the impact of the gods really have their impact without spoiling the main event, too early is in the events of White March Part 2, which focuses more on the philosophies of the gods of Ondra and Abidan. Ondra being the goddess of love, mourning, the tides, oceans as well as memory, and Abidan the god of progress, crafting, accomplishment, and construction. Now if you want to be completely spoiler-free, skip ahead to this part here. The White March Part 2 follows the events of White March Part 1, which is when the Watcher activates an ancient forge blessed with divine power called the White Forge. In Part 2, it is revealed that Ondra originally sent an army hundreds of years ago to destroy anyone who knew about the forge, to remove the existence of it from the face of the world. When you, the Watcher, discover Ondra's secret atop her temple of worship, you will initiate a dialogue with the goddess of oceans herself.
The dwarves sealed their own fate. The forge was meant to be forgotten. It was never meant for mortal use. Such power, such truths lie within it. It can bring only ruin. When the Pargrunin came to the White March, they were peaceful. They shared common beliefs and purpose. Their visions for the Forge tore them apart. You have seen this for yourself. They would have destroyed themselves in the end.
Essentially, Andra's reasoning is that certain things in history need to be wiped away from memory for civilization to grow.
How many wars, how many fallen empires might have been averted if only their leaders could forget the objects of their ambition? Mortals measure the worth of their lives in memory. Who will remember me? How long until I am forgotten? Memory governs every thought, informs every choice. It can fuel passion, understanding, love, or it can create obsession, madness.
She even confesses that at one point in history, she wanted to destroy the Engwithans. So she tries to throw a moon down from the heavens to destroy all of the Engwithans, fearing that their progress in soul manipulation had grown too far. However, the god Obsidian, and Andra's lover, sacrificed himself to dampen the damage to the Engwithan cities and people, because he believed preservation and progress were more important. At the end of the White March expansion, you managed to save the people of White March from an army of giant automatons controlled by Andra. Upon their death, the automaton souls come to you and question your actions.
We shatter and sink, discarded like worn tools. Why have you consigned us to oblivion?
Throughout this council, these automatons reveal that they were once tools of Obsidian to help preserve the accomplishments of Kith, in particular the Engwithans. Their philosophy, however, is the complete antithesis of Andra.
It is unwise to douse a lamp in darkness, to cut the legs from a table. This forgetting is suicide, heresy. Every advance in the crafts and institutions of Kith was forged by skill and sacrifice. Each culture builds on the bones of the last. Yet many only look up at where they would go, never down at the foundations that bear them.
And in this moment, you the player have to decide which philosophy is true. The philosophical arguments of both Andra and Obsidian are brought to the player's attention, and you have to decide whether or not to restore Obsidian and his memory, or keep the memory of Andra destroying the Engwithans a secret. This shows how integral and grounded the pantheon is in the storytelling of Pillars of Eternity. Two gods with conflicting philosophies had such a significant impact on not only the world, but the people within it. Companions like Aloth, Zawa, and Meneha can contribute pieces to this council with the automatons related to this core argument of, do certain memories deserve to be forgotten, or do certain memories deserve to be remembered? And to me, it's a question that only a world like Eora can ask. When I completed White March, I thought about what the other people in my party might be thinking of this, what just transpired. And that got me thinking about how well written the companions are in Pillars of Eternity. The Watcher's Friends. Whenever a CRPG is analysed, it's important to talk about the companions. Companions are introduced for a basic set of reasons. Characters to bolster you in combat encounters and provide the chance for additional side quests. But Pillars of Eternity makes companion quests more in-depth and deals with existential questions these characters would have in a world filled with such detailed history and such a well-built pantheon. While I could talk about the companions and how well written they are in terms of dialogue and characterization, there's something far more relevant in the context of video game narratives we should be discussing: quest design. Quests for companions have been around since the days of Baldur's Gate 2 and other popular RPGs. As time went on, these companion quests evolved to have introspective elements to them. In Fallout New Vegas, for example, many of the companions could have up to 2 to 3 endings. The journey of your companions usually involves a personal issue. You can have very nuanced companion quests. Something personal and everyday, like mustering up the courage to ask out a girl on a date, for the character of Parvati in Outer Worlds, for example. Alistair in Dragon Age Origins finds out he is actually royalty and has to decide on what he wants to do with that information. But the relevance to the player is how the player controls them to the outcome or controls their decisions. I think a lot of game writers, in particular those at Obsidian and BioWare, began to see the storytelling potential of these companion quests. However, my personal criticisms for companion quests are the following. In some cases, they can make companions come across as helpless without the player's input. Now, unintentionally, this makes sense. The player is the active agent in the storytelling, and they should have the ability to direct the interactive story. This is a reasonable feature. As well as sometimes crafting the companion's side quests to be merely a tool to introduce world building and create nuance. Look, nuance is fine, but the purpose of companion quests, in my opinion, is to engage the player more with the companion character, as well as introduce more of the world. Now let's bring this back to Pillars of Eternity. In addressing both of these criticisms that I have for video game storytelling in general, Pillars of Eternity does a great job at making the character feel they are not being controlled by the player, but are indeed guided by the player in subtle ways. This is constructed by the excellent dialogue and plot within most of the player companion's quests. To take an example, we can examine the quest of the companion Haravius, who is one of my favorite companions. After a brutal attack from a wild creature known as a Stalgar, the druid Haravius discovered his spirit form, the Autumn Stalgar. His tribe saw this form as an abomination and was ostracized from them as a result, believing him to be a bad omen. Feeling abandoned by his patron god, Galawain, the god of the hunt, survival, and protector of the wilderness, he turns to Wal instead for guidance, the god of dreams, secrets, mysteries, and revelations. Throughout your journey, he decides to pursue the truth of what the Autumn Stalgar really means. In the area known as Twin Elms, he discovers that the Autumn Stalgar is an instrument of balance in the world of Eora, consuming the fragments of souls, an agent of entropy in the cosmic cycle of the world. But here's the interesting part. His decision boils down to which god's teachings he should follow to come to terms with this truth. He follows both Galawain and Wal. Throughout the quest, most of the dialogue choices reflect this duality of the conflict he faces. You can encourage him to pursue his destiny as the Autumn Stalgar and accept his role as a predator, or you can show him that discovering the truth is more meaningful. In my playthroughs of Pillars, I have helped Haravius get to both of these outcomes. This time round, I guided Haravius to his decision that Wal's enlightening teachings are more empowering than the brutal lessons of Galawain. After the quest, he says to the Watcher the following: "Wal has shown me all I need to see. My ostracism is the price I have to pay for asking the Seeker for something I was not ready to bear. I am a questioner first, and a hunter second. Praise be to Wal. He knew I needed to learn that fact the hard way, and I prefer any god willing to give me a vague nudge instead of a helpful mutilation." Now, what does this really mean in terms of video game narratives and quest design? This quest is one of my favorite companion quests in any RPG I've ever played. This is because the quest explores multiple layers of the companion, the player, and the world they inhabit. Making great quests in RPGs comes down to context upon context. This is why the Bloody Baron questline in The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is often signaled to as a great quest. It is because of the layers of context it has. Going back to Haravius now, let's lay out the levels of context there. Haravius has to decide which god's teachings to follow, showing his trust in the gods to elucidate the truth to him. His ostracism from his tribe tells us of the world Haravius came from and the significance of the Autumn Stalgar in this world. His desire between following Wal or Galawain communicates to us how the pantheon, each of these gods, has such a power over the people in Eora. It reveals that the core of Haravius' struggle is his acceptance of the truth. Companions such as Kana and Adair have quests that lead to not exactly positive revelations. They merely come to a truth that they have to fully realize, in spite of how hard it is to accept. The truth isn't inherently good or evil, it's just the truth. For Haravius, he has two versions of the truth, based on whatever god he decided to follow. There is no good or evil choice. Many of the companions, including Haravius, have stories that are morally ambiguous but are not necessarily grim or dark. However, there are a few. In relation to this, while I think most of the companions in Pillars of Eternity deserve their own breakdown of their quests, there are two companions that I'd like to focus on a bit more. Grieving Mother, a mysterious companion. Grieving Mother, a companion known by no other name in the game, is shrouded in mystery. You meet her in Deerford, a town just outside the Ingwithan ruin of Clearbarn Relag. Meeting companions in RPGs has always been a fine skill to master. Game writers have indeed come a long way when it comes to finding ways for NPCs to join your party. There have been some really great hooks written for NPCs to join you in RPGs, such as Felix from the Outer Worlds.
Additionally, I have several years of experience as a box hauler. This skill may come in handy if you need a body dragged away or a door held open while escaping enemy fire. In conclusion, thank you for considering me for your ship crew and/or outlaw gang. I look forward to our adventures together.
I thought that was real good, Felix.
Thanks for the vote of confidence. What do you think? Am I in?
Grieving Mother, though, to me, had one of the most interesting hooks I've encountered in any RPG. You see, the powers of the Watcher can often go underutilized in the narrative, but meeting Grieving Mother really reminds you that you are not like most people in Eora. When you two meet, there is immediately a connection between the both of you. When you are recruiting her, there is hardly any spoken dialogue. There is just a series of tells showing how you are slowly unraveling her illusion, and that you two share something. Grieving Mother is in hiding for some reason. As a Watcher, when we rest, we have dreams related to her, showing us cryptic visions wrapped in metaphor. We see the imagery of bells in these dreams, which we've established is connected to the world's symbology of passing between life and death. But this time it represents the entry of life from the wheel. Eventually it is revealed that, as a cipher, the class in Pillars that resembles traditional scions in fantasy, and while she was the midwife in her home village, she manipulated the minds of mothers who gave birth to hollowborn children to believe they were fit and healthy. She claimed to have done this to save the mother's sanity and also the lives of their children, but the motive as to why she did it is not straightforward and clear-cut as she did a good thing or she did a bad thing. In fact, the crux of her whole quest is how you judge her given the context. You have two outcomes. Do you save her from destroying herself with guilt for what she did? Or will you lead her to the conclusion that her actions were indeed wrong? She also reveals that in her hometown, she lied about being a Watcher to gain the trust of the mothers that she was a midwife for.
And with the weight of Watcher behind my thoughts, these tells gain strength. Strength I never possessed on my own. They believed, and what they believed became the truth. With each child that was set upon that path, the title of Watcher became stronger.
Not only did this introduce some ambiguity in her actions, but for me, it showed how humans, well, Kith too, can blindly invest trust in higher powers. But in a world where the gods can bring down moons and shape the earth itself, one would definitely be more inclined to believe in their presence as well as Watchers, unquestioningly. The title of Watcher, a speaker of souls, itself carries huge amounts of importance. Something Grieving Mother used to ensure her place within a community where she felt like she was doing good. Until the Hollowborn crisis, which forced her to act, deciding that life and sanity should be valued over truth. The character arc of Grieving Mother throws the player into the moral quandary of, can concealing the truth be justified for the greater good? This is something relevant to the story's main antagonist as well, Theos. It makes us think about when a lie is acceptable. What if it saves lives? What if it saves your life? But also remember that she willingly created illusions for the mother of a healthy child who were in reality soulless hollowborn. One mother even ended up starving herself to death as she desperately tried to care for the child. Is the fact that she brainwashed people too far? This story requires you to engage in this philosophical reasoning to actually complete the quest. This companion quest follows the same theme of how the Watcher doesn't outright decide what the companion should do. They simply provide guidance that feels like the companion themselves reach an independent decision.
Your words have soothed my mind in ways I did not expect. I thank you, Watcher, for the gift of your sight, for using it to guide me out of the prison of my mind. Let us hope it can also free you from the illusions Theos has woven around you.
If I could, as I said, I talk about every companion quest in this game. They're all something worthy to be discussed. And I said there was two, and the last one we're going to talk about is someone who was a bit controversial. Durance, a man of trials and faith. One thing Pillars does very well is that it doesn't moralize the actions of certain characters as blatantly evil or heroically good, like Grieving Mother's quest or the antagonist, Theos. Durance accompanies you in the belief that his trial in winning the favor of his patron goddess, Margarin, will be achieved by traveling with the Watcher along his journey. He's not the most amiable person to travel with either. To be blunt, he is quite the bastard. He's a racist, a misogynist, and well, a war criminal. He openly justifies genocide in the name of wiping out those of a different faith.
As I see it, every Aothasian who still lives in the Deerwood puts the nation at risk, is another dagger held to the throat of our faith. Root them out, burn them, or send them back to Raed Ceres to wallow in the blood of their failure.
Look, this isn't a segment to describe how horrible Durance's character is, but more to point out how the writing of his character and what it achieves. Durance was written by Chris Avellone. The games and characters he's worked on have a certain recognizable quality. Another character Avellone is famous for writing is the character Kreia from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2. Now, I haven't played any of the Star Wars RPG games, and I admit I had to watch another video essay to understand the game and her character, link for that below. But from what I gathered, I can see how Kreia and Durance actually share a similarity in the sort of characters Avellone likes to write. These characters have gone through incredible trials of faith. Avellone writes the characters of Kreia, Durance, and even Grieving Mother to an extent to contain philosophical threads of challenging faith and the pursuit of power. Durance and Kreia both emphasize the semi-Nietzschean importance of inner struggle and trials. Also, they both worked with the weapon of mass devastation. For Durance, the god hammer that destroyed Aethys, and Kreia, who was willing to open the Force wound on Malachor 5 to destroy the Force. But more importantly, their actions lead to a challenge of their faith, be that Kreia's faith in the Force, or Durance's faith in the goddess Margarin. Throughout the game, we find out Durance acted on the side of the Deerwooden Rebellion against Raed Ceres during the Saints' War. He and 11 priests of Margarin constructed the God Hammer that destroyed Aethys. 11 of the Magranic priests involved in its construction were killed in the detonation of the bomb, except for Durance, the 12th maker of the weapon. Shortly after the God Hammer's detonation, he realized he could no longer hear the voice of Margarin.
Not all deaths come with stilled breath and stilled heart, or other stilled passions beneath the waste. Some deaths come from silence. The connection we once shared with Margarin. After the light of the Godhammer, it was not the same. It was as if we'd lost our senses, and sense of purpose as well. Instead of victory being welcomed, there was silence, within and without.
This is why Durance accompanies you throughout the game. He believes that in following the path with you, he will gain the attention of his beloved goddess again. There is a part in the game where you petition the fiery goddess Margarin for aid during the final quest. There she gives Durance, quite ironically, being a god of fire and everything, the cold shoulder. In this council with the gods to receive aid to defeat Theos, Margarin admits her creation of the God Hammer was in fact a conspired effort between her and the dethroned ruler of the pantheon, Wardica, the goddess of law, hierarchies, and justice. This causes Durance to question his faith in Margaret, because it means he was manipulated, a tool of the goddess for her own devices. But Durance insists that Margaret was not guilty, that maybe she was tricked. If you fulfill the requirements of this quest, you're able to break him out of this delusion, and the exact moment of his realization results in this blood-curdling scream. That scream represents his world's truth shattering. After I did this, it felt that I didn't complete the quest correctly. Like maybe I triggered him to go down some dark path or something? But the more I thought on it, the more it made sense. Durance's companion quest, while it engages in certain philosophical principles and a struggle of faith, largely has a core theme that addresses how blind zealotry leads to a disconnection of your own identity. Even when he disavows his goddess Margaret, he just pivots to pursue some other divine mission.
To think I served her, I followed her. Now I shall serve no one. Woodica's lies must be answered. And now it seems I must take fire and war from a goddess's false claim as well. For I have learned one of the lessons of the faithful. The faithful may wound a goddess greater than any enemy. A purification is coming, and this fire shall consume them both.
And this is important in terms of creating great companion quests. Remember, it's all about context upon context. Most of the quests for the companions and pillars adhere to some personal existential struggle and are heavily woven into the world. We see the magnitude of the effect the pantheon has on the people of Eora. You can believe that a man like Durance would exist in a world like this, and that is the ultimate goal when it comes to creating companions in RPGs. The player has to believe they can be a real person in the given setting. There's a point in the final part of Durance's quest when he discovered Margaret's betrayal, and you ask him if it would have been better for him to have been spared this knowledge.
No, I am glad to have walked this far with you, seen this truth. Perhaps it was what I was meant to see, with a watcher's eyes.
Truth and revelation are core themes to the storytelling threads in Pillars of Eternity. However, there is a far greater revelation from a truth that brings the legitimacy of the pantheon of Eora into question. Of truth and revelation. All these narrative threads of truth, discovery, and revelation all intertwine during the fourth act of the story. After numerous adventures, we unveil Theos' schemes. He and the Leaden Key have been orchestrating the elaborate scapegoating of animancers to be the cause of Widewind's legacy, causing thousands of births of Hollowborn. Theos did this to resurrect the former ruler of the Eoran pantheon, Woodica. He enters the Ingwithan ruin known as Sun in Shadow in order to enact the final phase of his plan by activating another of the ancient machines that manipulate souls, just like the one that tore out your soul at the beginning of the game. This will funnel the power of these souls to the weakened god Woodica with the intention of empowering her. But he has barred any way for us to follow him, so we must pledge to the gods for aid. Now, I found this moment to be quite interesting. In most fantasy RPGs, it is the player's power and exceptional destiny that allows them to forge a path to the final confrontation. But in Eora, none are more powerful than the gods. Even a watcher must petition the gods for power. In turn, you must perform a task to gain their favor. And the thing is, if you don't do this, nothing will happen. The only way to save the world, and even save the gods, is to be at the mercy of them. This quest really shows the player through a ludic interaction that the gods do not grant favors unless their power is respected. By completing these tasks, you gain the favor of one or a few or all of the gods. The gods will ask the player what they should do with the souls once they are free from Theos. After this, they will grant you their blessing to safely jump down a sacrificial pit in the Ingwithan ruin. But before going off to find Theos, You enter Briath Eaman, a soul prison. There you will find the soul of someone from your past life, Eora. And like you, her life was intertwined with Theos. Eora was an inquisitor under Theos' command, like you were in a past life, to bring word to every end of the world of the one true faith professed by the Inquisition people. To keep it short, it all boils down to this. She discovers that the Inquisition was lying to everyone. Theos asks you to try and steer her back to the Inquisition, only that the person in your past life betrayed her, and she was caught by Theos. She was then horribly tortured to confess heresy, and then imprisoned in Briath Eaman for nearly 1,000 years. This guilt plagues your soul's past life. Upon asking what the Inquisition was lying about, she tells you this.
That the gods aren't real. What I taught was that the gods whose faith we had been spreading were not gods at all, but something else entirely. Something created by people.
This here is the main reason why I love Pillars of Eternity. The idea that the most powerful beings in Eora were actually created by mortals as a means to create order in the universe speaks so much of our own humanity. The creation of divine beings suggests that some people do need higher powers to believe in or have a bestowed sense of purpose in life. Many look to the heavens, when maybe, as the text of the game suggests, that we should look inward. Sometimes religion can't explain why cruelty exists in a world created by divine beings. Look what happened to Durance when the heavens stopped telling him what to do with his life. All we can really rely on is ourselves to discover the truth. When we reflect on these stories of our companions and even the side story of the Watcher's past life in this game, we see that the pursuit of truth is one that drives people to discover more about themselves. And the game does not propose that believing in gods is the wrong way to do this. For some, religious teachings are the tools to discover the truth in themselves. But organizations like the Leaden Key believe that the truth that the gods were created by mortals must be concealed at all costs. There is no limit to the lives that must be taken to conceal this truth.
I have no illusions about the costs involved. But what your brief lifespan obscures is that it is what must be done. The heart of this country has skipped a beat, nothing more. I have done far worse. I plunged the peaceful kingdom of Telosus into civil war. I slew the monarch of Desantio, whose people never knew hardship under his rule, and replaced him with a cruel despot who brought them to ruin. When plague arrived at the great city of Arborensis, I saw to it that the cure did not. They piled their dead outside the city in heaps that rose above their walls.
When you confront Theos about this treachery, he will reason that the obfuscation of truth was necessary for the greater good.
All I have seen, the millennia of experience. I will not be dissuaded from this course. This is the only way.
But like Durance, Theos' zealotry has caused him to become distant from his own humanity. And like Grieving Mother, while she was forced to obfuscate the truth for her own safety and those in her care, Theos did it from a pedestal of self-righteousness. Thus, Theos embodies the antithesis of the narrative in Pillars of Eternity, that the obscuring of truth is its bane. And from what we've seen from the many quests and interactions throughout this game, it suggests that the thesis of this entire game's story is that the truth is imperative, and the revelation of truth is freedom. Conclusion. While this game did follow a more novel-like structure to its video game narrative, it's still an excellent way to tell stories in video games. The storytelling tools it uses should be built upon in the coming generations of RPGs. So let's go over them. Having core themes that are reiterated, reinforced, and repeated subtly allows the players to have a solid path for the narrative experience. Setting the tone of the story is essential. Use potent imagery and symbolism through a unique visual and audio aesthetic as shorthand. Good writing is often in its subtlety. Be sure to balance how much is directing the player and when you should be giving more agency to them. When world building, remember you can't build up everything to perfection. Focus on one or two anchors in your world building that you intend to showcase and have it all work back to these anchors, such as histories, societies, magic systems, or belief systems. This will show that you have thought out your world in a genuine way. Excellent companions and their tie-in quests come back to context upon context. Think of ways that companions and their quests are connected to important factors of the world, such as their religious beliefs, and even the beliefs of other people that are close to that companion. Having the antagonist of your story be the antithesis of an idea within your world is a great way to create a genuine villain without making them an evil lord archetype. And I say this last bit with some importance, because we've been telling the same stories in video games for decades of good versus evil. The same tired old restoration narrative. Pillars of Eternity speaks of something far more grounded and something that discusses real life. Not many of us will fight an evil like the world has never seen, and I understand that most fantasy is about dealing with the shittiness of real life. It's all about having that symbolic construct that allows us to exert our need for control in our own lives. We all want to dream of going toe-to-toe with our oppressors, but face it, most of us never will. But really, I'd like to wager that most of us struggle with the disconnection to a sense of higher purpose or dealing with the inconvenient truths of life. I wanted to end this video with a pithy quote, something to really wrap it all up, but everything I found just didn't quite satisfy me. So, I guess I just wanted to say, I think in the world that we're living now, that is rapidly being fractured by misinformation, lies, and deliberate narrativization, maybe it's now is a good time to remember what truth actually is. Lies are simple, they have a molded purpose, and really require no effort to speak. Lies can be whispered in back rooms or can be shouted from podiums as unchallenged dogma, while truth is a concept, something between life and death. It is fatal, unapologetic, and reminds us of the fragile nature of our own existence, but it's also its own reward. The truth is complex, it's sought out, hunted, discovered through the diligence of our own human essence. It is also inconvenient at times. It is the crucible on which we lay down our own ego and reveal the nature of the world and what we really are as human beings. The truth is neither good nor evil. It's just the truth. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that lovely stuff down below. Thank you very much for watching this video. I know I say this every time, but this has been a real work of passion for me. And it's been a long one, everything that happened in 2020 and everything. It's been rough for everyone, and I just wanted to extend my best wishes and sincere hope to everyone in these shit times. Follow me on Twitter if you can. I have a Discord now too with private invites if you're interested. And until next time, share this video with your mates and I'll catch you later.